Let us begin with the elements of poetry. This is a very important topic in literature in English. It appears in your exams every single year. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the definition of poetry, the types of poetry, the major elements of poetry, including rhythm, meter, rhyme, stanza, imagery, figurative language, sound devices, tone, and theme, and how to answer exam questions. Take your notes. Let us go. First, what is poetry? Poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of language to evoke meaning. Poetry is different from prose. It is more condensed. It uses fewer words to say more. Poetry often has a regular rhythm. It may have rhyme. Poetry uses figurative language, imagery, and sound devices to create effect. Poetry is meant to be read aloud. The sound of the words is important. Poetry expresses emotions, ideas, and experiences in powerful ways. It can be very short, like a haiku of 3 lines, or very long, like an epic of thousands of lines. Now, let me explain the types of poetry. There are 3 main types. Lyric poetry expresses personal emotions and feelings. It is usually short and musical. The poet speaks in the first person. Lyric poems do not tell a story. They capture a moment, a feeling, or an idea. Examples of lyric poetry include sonnets, odes, and elegies. A sonnet is a 1-4-line poem with a specific rhyme scheme. An ode is a poem that praises a person, place, or thing. An elegy is a poem that mourns the dead. William Wordsworth's "I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud" is a lyric poem. It expresses the poet's joy at seeing daffodils. Narrative poetry tells a story. It has a plot, characters, and a setting. Narrative poems can be short or long. A ballad is a short narrative poem that was originally meant to be sung. Ballads often have a repeated refrain. They tell stories of love, tragedy, or adventure. An epic is a very long narrative poem about a hero. Epics deal with grand themes like war, courage, and fate. The Odyssey by Homer is an epic. The Sundiata epic is a famous African epic. Dramatic poetry is written in the form of a speech or dialogue. The poet creates a persona who speaks. The reader learns about the speaker's character through their words. Dramatic monologues are a type of dramatic poetry. Robert Browning was a master of the dramatic monologue. Now let me explain the sound elements of poetry. These are the devices that create the musical quality of poetry. The first is rhythm. Rhythm is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line of poetry. English words have stressed and unstressed syllables. For example, the word poetry has 3 syllables. The first syllable is stressed. The second and third are unstressed. The pattern of stresses creates rhythm. Rhythm makes poetry feel musical. It can be fast or slow, regular or irregular. Meter is the regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line of poetry. Meter is measured in units called feet. A foot is a group of syllables with a specific stress pattern. The most common feet are iamb, trochee, anapest, and dactyl. An iamb is 2 syllables with the stress on the second. Example: today. A trochee is 2 syllables with the stress on the first. Example: never. An anapest is 3 syllables with the stress on the third. Example: understand. A dactyl is 3 syllables with the stress on the first. Example: poetry. Meter is named by the number of feet in a line. Monometer has 1 foot. Dimeter has 2 feet. Trimeter has 3 feet. Tetrameter has 4 feet. Pentameter has 5 feet. Hexameter has 6 feet. Heptameter has 7 feet. Octameter has 8 feet. The most common meter in English poetry is iambic pentameter. This means 5 iambs per line. Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter. For example, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" That line has 5 iambs. Now let me explain rhyme. Rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds at the end of words. Rhyme creates musical effect. It also helps to structure the poem. There are several types of rhyme. End rhyme occurs at the end of lines. For example, "The cat in the hat sat on a mat." Internal rhyme occurs within a line. For example, "I bring fresh showers for the thirsty flowers." Rhyme scheme is the pattern of rhymes in a poem. It is usually shown with letters. For example, a poem with the rhyme scheme ABAB means that the first line rhymes with the third, and the second rhymes with the fourth. Perfect rhyme is when the sounds match exactly. Cat and hat are perfect rhymes. Slant rhyme, also called near rhyme, is when the sounds are similar but not exact. Examples include prove and love, or time and mine. I rhyme is when the words look like they rhyme but do not. Examples include love and move, or cough and tough. You need to know these types for your exam. Now let me explain other sound devices. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. For example, Peter Piper picked pickled peppers. Alliteration creates rhythm and emphasis. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within words. For example, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Assonance creates internal rhyme and musicality. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds anywhere in words, not just at the beginning. For example, the lumpy bumpy road. Consonance creates texture and emphasis. Onomatopoeia is the use of words that imitate sounds. Examples include buzz, hiss, boom, clang, and whisper. Onomatopoeia makes the poem more vivid and sensory. Repetition is the repeating of words, phrases, or lines. Repetition creates emphasis and rhythm. It can also create a sense of obsession or intensity. Refrain is a repeated line or phrase in a poem, usually at the end of stanzas. Refrain is common in ballads and songs. Now let me explain imagery. Imagery is the use of sensory details to create pictures in the reader's mind. Poets use imagery to make the reader see, hear, smell, taste, and feel what the poet describes. There are several types of imagery. Visual imagery appeals to the sense of sight. It describes how things look. For example, the golden sun sank below the purple horizon. Auditory imagery appeals to the sense of hearing. It describes sounds. For example, the gentle whisper of the wind. Olfactory imagery appeals to the sense of smell. It describes odors. For example, the sweet scent of jasmine filled the air. Gustatory imagery appeals to the sense of taste. It describes flavors. For example, the bitter taste of disappointment. Tactile imagery appeals to the sense of touch. It describes textures and temperatures. For example, the rough bark of the tree scraped my palm. Kinesthetic imagery appeals to the sense of movement. It describes motion. For example, the dancer twirled across the stage. Organic imagery appeals to internal sensations like hunger, thirst, fatigue, or emotion. For example, a cold fear gripped my heart. Good poets use multiple types of imagery to create a vivid experience for the reader. Now let me explain figurative language. Figurative language is language that is not meant to be taken literally. It uses words in creative ways to express ideas. Simile is a comparison using like or as. For example, her eyes sparkled like diamonds. Similes make descriptions more vivid. Metaphor is a direct comparison that says one thing is another. For example, the world is a stage. Metaphors are more direct and powerful than similes. Personification is giving human qualities to non-human things. For example, the wind whispered through the trees. Personification makes the natural world feel alive. Hyperbole is extreme exaggeration for effect. For example, I have told you 1,000,000 times. Hyperbole expresses strong emotion or humor. Understatement is the opposite of hyperbole. It says less than is true for effect. For example, it is just a scratch, when the car is badly damaged. Irony is a contrast between expectation and reality. Verbal irony is saying the opposite of what you mean. Sarcasm is a form of verbal irony. Situational irony is when the opposite of what you expect happens. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not. Paradox is a statement that seems contradictory, but reveals a truth. For example, the more you give, the more you have. Oxymoron is a phrase that combines contradictory terms. Examples include bittersweet, deafening silence, and living death. Symbolism is when an object, person, or action represents an idea. For example, a dove symbolizes peace. A rose symbolizes love. A chain symbolizes bondage or connection. Symbols can be universal or personal to the writer. Now let me explain stanza and line. A line is a single row of words in a poem. Poets choose where to break lines. This affects rhythm and meaning. Line length can be short or long. Short lines create speed and urgency. Long lines create calmness or heaviness. Enjambment is when a line breaks without punctuation. The thought continues to the next line. This creates flow and speed. End-stop line is when a line ends with punctuation. This creates pause and emphasis. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem. Stanzas are separated by blank space. They are like paragraphs in prose. Couplet is 2 lines that usually rhyme. Tercet is 3 lines. Quatrain is 4 lines. Cinquain is 5 lines. Sestet is 6 lines. Octave is 8 lines. Now let me explain tone and theme. Tone is the poet's attitude toward the subject or audience. Tone is conveyed through word choice, rhythm, and imagery. The tone could be joyful, sad, angry, sarcastic, hopeful, fearful, playful, or serious. To identify tone, ask yourself how the poet feels. Look at the words they choose. Theme is the central idea or message of the poem. It is what the poem says about life, human nature, or society. A poem can have multiple themes. To identify theme, look at the subject, the imagery, and the tone. Ask yourself what the poet is trying to say. A common exam question asks you to define poetry and list its types. Here is a sample answer. Poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of language to evoke meaning. The 3 main types of poetry are lyric, narrative, and dramatic. Lyric poetry expresses personal emotions. Narrative poetry tells a story. Dramatic poetry is written as a speech or dialogue. Each type has its own features and purposes. Another exam question asks you to explain the sound devices used in poetry. Here is your answer. Sound devices include rhythm, the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. Meter is the regular pattern of feet in a line. Rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds. Alliteration is repetition of initial consonant sounds. Assonance is repetition of vowel sounds. Consonance is repetition of consonant sounds anywhere. Onomatopoeia is words that imitate sounds. Repetition and refrain are also sound devices. These devices create the musical quality of poetry. Another exam question asks you to explain figurative language in poetry. Here is your answer. Figurative language includes simile, comparison using like or as, metaphor, direct comparison saying one thing is another, personification, giving human qualities to non-human things, hyperbole, extreme exaggeration, irony, contrast between expectation and reality, paradox, seemingly contradictory statement that reveals truth, oxymoron, combination of contradictory terms, symbolism, where objects represent ideas. Figurative language makes poetry more vivid and meaningful. Here is what you need to take away. Poetry is a condensed, rhythmic form of literature. Types include lyric, narrative, and dramatic. Sound elements include rhythm, meter, rhyme, alliteration, assonance, consonance, and onomatopoeia. Imagery uses sensory details. Figurative language includes simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, irony, paradox, oxymoron, and symbolism. Lines and stanzas give poetry its shape. Tone is the poet's attitude. Theme is the central message. Understanding these elements is essential for analyzing poetry. Practice these concepts. When you have them down, move to topic 4.